right, so now that we have some basic textures on here, we have our little ball textured, we have just very basic color going on. What we want to do is we want to explore some of the other channels that we can drive with texture maps. What this allows us to do is start to modify the ball in various ways, for example, through modeling information. So let's say maybe we wanted it to look like the stars had a little ledge to the outline and then they divoted inward, maybe the stripe on the ball too. How could we achieve that? Well, it'd be challenging through modeling, so we'd have to get a lot of detail in there. We'd have to find a way to make a star shape on here. Good luck with that. So it's a lot easier to drive it through things like texturing. Now, inside of your material here, you'll find a section called Bump, which in the Properties Manager is located down here. And if we go ahead and click on the object here, you can find the bump map located at the top here in the Common Material section. So in the Attribute Editor, it's going to be in the Common Material section. In the Properties Manager, it's going to be in its own section. Now, talking about a bump map and what it is, a bump map is a form of what we call artificial surface relief. Surface relief is referring to a concept in art and design where you make a surface look three-dimensional. So if you think of something like a coin has a surface relief on it where it has a depiction of something on it that looks three-dimensional, but it's on a flat surface. So that's kind of the idea of a surface relief, and it's really good for capturing any of that sort of information that is three-dimensional. It looks as if it pops off the form, but it doesn't break the silhouette. Now, when we talk about the silhouette of an object, if you just turn the lights on with no lights in the scene, the silhouette is the outline of the object. So a very small bump on the star or on the stripe, we wouldn't see that necessarily because of how small it is relative to the object. Now, if we were an ant crawling on the surface, absolutely, in which case we'd have to model it. But if that's not the type of animation we're creating, then by no means do we need to do that. So I'm going to turn my lights back on, and let's hop over here and talk about a bump map. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save out my file to be a bump map. So I'm going to come up here to File, and I'm going to go to Save As, and we're just going to name this ball, and instead of color, we're going to name it _bump. This way I can edit this into a bump map. Now, the way bump maps work is the color 50% gray is going to be considered flat, and any color above that is going to be considered elevated. So moving towards white will look like it's coming off of the surface, and any color beneath that will look like it's indented. So black will look like it's going down underneath the surface. Now we can edit the colors of our shapes pretty easily. If I come into the shape here, we can access it by clicking on the layer, and then we can navigate here over to our Appearance tab in the Properties, and in the Fill slot, we can change its color. We're going to set the background to be 50% gray, so this is perfectly flat when we look at it in Maya. I'm going to click the Color tab here, and inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these channels here to drive what I want it to be. The hue doesn't matter, but we're going to set the saturation to 0, and we're going to set the brightness to 50%. Brightness is the same thing as value. So we're going to set saturation to 0, so it turns to gray. And we're going to set the B, or brightness, to 50, so we get a 50% gray. This is going to be considered flat. I'm going to hit OK, and that's going to flatten this out in terms of our bump map in Maya. However, we need to edit our other shapes to look like they have that little bump I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and come into the stripe, since that's going to be the easiest to modify. And coming over to the stripe here, I'm going to introduce a stroke to add a bump to this. So clicking on the stroke here, I can select a color that is above 50% gray, which in this case, I'll go ahead and just select white, which is a bit intense, but we'll go ahead and add that in here. And then we need to modify the other parameters to just look like it's elevated. So I'm going to switch this from a dashed line to a straight line. I'm going to reduce the size of this so it's not massive, and we just get a bit of a lip going on to our surface. And I also want to change the alignment here. So we can change the alignment to the stroke using this one here. You can either select outside, you can select in between, or you can select inside the shape. I'm going to select inside the shape, that way it's not popping off of here. So this will give me a nice little elevated surface. Now, just to make it consistent, I'm going to maybe set this down to 5 pixels, make it nice and thin, and then I can use this on the stars as my base. Now, the stars are all currently separate shapes, but it would be nice if they were a singular shape for the purpose of doing this edit. If you want to combine shapes or any sort of layers in this, you can merge them using the function by selecting multiple, right-clicking, and merging. Now, just be aware that combining shapes with shapes will result in a shape layer that we can still edit the stroke and fill of. But if you combined shape layers with normal layers, it will rasterize them, converting them out of vector space and turning them into pixel space, and you will no longer have access to the strokes. So just be aware you don't want to grab anything but the stars here. The way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to click the bottom one or the top one, doesn't matter, and then shift click to the opposite. So since I'm going from bottom to top, I'm going to shift click to the top. Now you want to make sure you only have these stars selected. If your layer stack is different than mine, just be aware you might have to select differently or rearrange them to achieve this. You can then right click here and you can select this option here called Merge Shapes. Once we do this, it will nest these under a single shape layer and we'll be able to modify the stroke and the fill for each of the stars simultaneously. So we're going to merge those down into one. I can then come into my appearances here. I can sample that white again here, and I can come and change some of the settings. For example, this is at 1. I'm just going to type in 5 to make it the same. And I'm going to make sure that's on the inside, and there we go. Now, in addition to this, I might want to make the stars gray and the backdrop gray, or I can make it see-through. I could kind of pick and choose, but regardless, that will give me the result I'm looking for. So let's click off of here just to check. What we should see when we apply this as a bump is that everything's going to be flat, but these are going to have a little lifted surface. So let's go ahead and see if that's how it works. I'm going to save this over my bump, and we can hook this up. Now, the bump map's a little bit different than color to hook up, and we'll see why that is in a moment here. But as you can see, it only takes a map input. We can't just pick a color. You can select the file here and just be aware that you can do it from either of these menus. So I will be interchanging between these throughout the course. I want to introduce you to it now so you just know I might be going to the attribute editor. I might go to the properties tab depending on preference. Today, let's just click on the properties tab. We can link into here and we can click our file to link in our bump. Now, when you do this, you're going to notice that we get a different looking setup here, and we don't have access to our bump file. So what is going on here? Well, what we're seeing is the bump 2D node. And this brings us into working in our work area over here. We're going to have to expand out Hypershade. So let's go ahead and give Hypershade a little bit more screen real estate here so we can see what is going on in our work area here. And let's go ahead and talk about some hotkeys that we can use in this area. The first thing is navigation. This is going to navigate similar to Maya. So we're going to use the Alt key to move around. To pan this, we can use Alt middle mouse button. And what I'm doing is just holding Alt and pressing the middle mouse button to move. And that's going to pan this so we can move side to side. Now, if you want to zoom, you can actually just scroll with your middle mouse wheel. You can also use the same setup as you do in Maya here to zoom in and out. So that's going to be Alt and pressing that right click. Okay. The only thing that doesn't really do anything is going to be Alt and left click, surprisingly. And that's because this is 2D space now. It's not 3D space. Okay. And this is going to be common throughout Maya. Whenever you're navigating a 2D menu, that Alt plus middle mouse button is going to be side to side, just like it is in 3D space. And the Alt right click is going to zoom. If you don't see this for some reason, you can select your ball up here and you can map it to the surface. So I currently see mine. I'm not worried, but just in the case you don't see yours, if you select your material here and you press the button here, which stands for input and output, that will show you all the nodes connected to this material. So go ahead and press that if you don't have it visible, and we'll be able to see everything hooked up. You can see our color is linked in here and it's linked into the color section. And if for whatever reason we needed to change our color or access it, we can actually select it through here. And you'll see now my properties becomes my color node. Likewise, you can see this bump set up here. And this is the bump that is driving our bump texture. This is what we landed on when we created it, the bump 2D. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But this is the file we need to access that's linked into this bump 2D. So to access the file, we can click on it here, and it's the exact same file node as with the color. So you already know how to use it. You can come over here and you can link in your color. You can use the little folder there, and that's going to allow us to navigate to our bump. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and click this. We'll go into our ball folder here, and we can select ball bump and hit open. And this is going to go ahead and hook this into here. So you'll see in our preview, we get this result here where those stars look like they have a little bit of an edge. And if we go ahead and make this a little bit smaller and take a look in Maya, you'll see that's the result we're getting there. So now we're getting a little bit of a ledge there on that surface, looking three-dimensional without having to do any modeling work. But you might notice it doesn't really look that great. I like to describe this look as a little bit crispy. And the reason why is we used pure white to represent our high area, our lifted area. Now, can we change that? Absolutely. We could come into Photoshop here and we could make that not white. So let's say I come in here and I reduce this down a bit. We could reduce this down closer to 50. We'll make that an 80% on the stroke. So set stroke to 80. And we can come down here and do the same on this one. We can go ahead and set this down to about 80 on the brightness, and that's going to reduce it by 2 notches. And we can go ahead and save. And hopping back over to Maya here, if I go ahead and click this and double click, you'll see that it looks slightly lower, but you might notice not low enough. Okay, so I mentioned we're going to revisit that bump 2D here. Well, if you revisit the bump 2D here, one of the things the bump 2D node gives us access to is bump depth. And this is a modifier that allows us to adjust the intensity of the overall map. In short, rather than having to guess the exact elevation, we can input a value in here to reduce this. So if I come in here and let's go ahead and reduce it down to something like 0.5, you'll see that cuts it in half. When working with bump maps in Maya, I find a magical number to be something around 0.03, where it just gives you this nice subtle bump, and that's probably what I'm going to be looking for there. So you can see that will give us just a basic bump there to make that ledge pop out. Okay, so that's going to be adjusted through bump depth. You can achieve that here. Now, you might also be asking, you can go down, but can you go up? And the answer is yes. If I set this to something like 10, you can see we can make that even crispier, even darker, and we can increase it. It's very rare that you go up, but you can. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a little bit more detail to this. I want to just kind of break up the surface and make it feel a little bit less smooth, a little bit less perfect. So hopping back into here, let's go ahead and explore some new tools to just modify this a bit more, to add a bit more character to it. What I want to do here is I want to go ahead and introduce a procedural here and introduce some noise. That way the surface has a roughness to it. Now, to achieve this, I'm going to need to create a new layer. So I'm going to click the new layer button right here. So I can make a fresh layer here. With this new layer, I can go ahead and fill this in. Now, I want to fill it in with the color black. So I can select my active colors over here, and I can swap one of these to black by clicking on it and just dragging it to 0 and hitting OK. And with this, I can fill in the layer one of two ways. You can either use Alt plus backspace. So that's what I did here. I held down Alt and hit backspace to do the front color, and that will fill in the layer. Or you could use Control backspace to do the other color. You can see my secondary color is that gray. That's what's filling in that layer. So I want to use Alt backspace as my hotkey to fill this in, and that's going to give me a solid fill layer of pure black. The reason we need to do this is we need pixels for the filter to actually affect. Once we have that done, you can go ahead and swap your colors down here to black and white. Remember, if you want to switch the position of these colors, you can hit the X key to change who's in front. So I'm going to hit X just to swap the other color to front, and I'm going to click that and make it white and hit OK. That's necessary because the filter is going to utilize those colors. Now, from there, we can come up to the filter menu. And in the filter menu, we're going to want to use a very specific filter here, which is going to be difference clouds. If we come down here to render, you can access something called difference clouds here. And this is going to give us a cloudy covering to our entire scene. Now, the reason why difference clouds is what we want to use is because it does something called tile, which means it repeats around the corners. And we'll take a look at that later, but it's a great foundational texture whenever we're creating something procedurally inside of here. So I'm going to click difference clouds to create these clouds. I'm going to go ahead and save this just so we can see the effect it has inside of Maya. We can double click that texture and you can see the result we're getting. Let me go ahead and set my bump back up to 1 so you can see it a bit better. It's sort of this roughness here across the surface that makes it look imperfect. So I lost my ledge here though, so we're going to want to bring that back. A way we can bring this back is using blending modes. So with this layer, we can come up here to the blending modes and we can experiment to find which one gives us what we're looking for. In this particular instance, we could do a screen if we wanted to make the outside look like it's pushed out, but I don't really feel like we want to do that. I feel like the ball would probably be pushed in from damage. So we could use something like a multiply to make it look like it's pushed in. We could also use a blending mode of an overlay to make it look like it's both pushed in and pushed out. But let's go with a multiply for now, which will bring back my ledges here. We can save and we can see the result here. And double click. And you'll see now we have a little bit of a surface texture and those look pushed outward a little bit. So we're getting the best of both worlds. Now it's a little bit intense across the board. I could come to the bump 2D here and set this to 0.03 to see the result it gives me. And in this particular instance, we're getting a little bit too subtle, maybe 0.1, maybe 0.3. So maybe somewhere around there. I like the look of that, where our shine has a little bit of a breakup to it and our stars have that ledge and so does our stripe. So now this is starting to feel a little bit more interesting. It has some surface information and some nice color detail that are working in tandem together. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to try adding in a bump map of your own to the ball. Try adding some interactions between whatever the color is you made and the bump map. So if you made a simple setup like me with shapes, feel free to try out the strokes there. And then add in some surface detail. Add in something like some noise to break up the form. Maybe consider adding in some scratches. For those of you who maybe know how to do more advanced Photoshop work, you could bring in photo information that you can use with your texture. Whatever you want to do, go ahead and give it a shot. And then let's go ahead and explore the specular channel next.